You're listening to A Family History of, the podcast where we explore major moments of Britain and Ireland's past through the eyes of the families who lived them. I'm Jen Baldwin, research specialist at Find My Past and genealogy expert, and I get to spend my days exploring the archives to reveal the remarkable stories of everyday people. In A Family History of Wartime Women, we're following Edna Bourne across 3 episodes, from her birth in Birmingham, England in 1911 through a life shaped by extraordinary events. In part 1, together with our guest, historian, author, and curator Lucy Worsley, we saw how wartime scarcity and civic duty defined Edna's early years. But her world has shifted again, and we're now in 1939. Edna is a working woman, and Britain is bracing for the Blitz. This chapter of Edna's story is one of love and secrecy, of choices made under the threat of air raids as war affected almost every aspect of day-to-day life. What did it mean to navigate respectability in wartime Britain? How did women balance work, family, and the unspoken rules of morality? And what do the records from this intriguing time in her life reveal? In this second part, Love, Work, and Wartime Secrets, we'll uncover the resilience that carried Edna through challenging times and the hidden truths that can ripple across generations. Welcome to A Family History of Wartime Women.
Birmingham, late 1939. The boot shop where Edna works feels close. It's a narrow room lined with shelves where boots stand in rigid rows, their leather dull under the weak autumn light. The air carries a sharp tang of polish, mixed with a faint sweetness of tea cooling in a chipped mug behind the counter. Edna goes about her work. She lifts a box from the stack, fingers brushing the paper label, and slides it open to reveal a pair of boots heavy enough to last through winter blackouts. Her apron is creased. A wisp of hair escapes its pin and curls against her cheek. Outside, footsteps scuff along the pavement, quick and uneven. A door slams somewhere down the street, followed by the low rumble of a lorry shifting gears. Back inside, the wireless crackles. The BBC Home Service shares vital news, rationing updates, morale-boosting entertainment. Edna pauses, one hand resting on the counter. Having already experienced war as a child, the tension and the terror of another looming conflict feel all too familiar.
We're meeting Edna again here in 1939 as the world has entered another global conflict, another war which will make its mark on her life, just as we've seen in the last episode. And to guide us through this period, I'm delighted to be joined once again by historian, author, curator, and Edna's granddaughter, Lucy Worsley. Lucy, welcome back to A Family History of Wartime Women. It's such a privilege to have you with us again.
I am thrilled to be here. Thank you for having me. And I'm looking forward to finding out what happened to my grandmother next.
Yeah. In this part, we'll follow Edna through the start of the Second World War, but not as many of you have heard it before. It's a woman's tale of work, marriage, and secrets. We'll look at what the records say, what the newspapers report, but perhaps more importantly, when tracing women's history, what's actually missing. Edna's story continues, and we're going to look at the 1939 register on Find My Past. Millions of lives across the country summarized in just a single line. Edna herself is now 28 years old, and her occupation is listed as a boot shop assistant. She lives at 13 Witten Lane with her parents, Thomas and Lucy. Thomas is a toolmaker, and Lucy keeps the home. It's a snapshot of a nation on one day, the 29th of September, 1939. Britain is at war. Birmingham braces for air raids, and Edna's life is about to change in ways the 1939 register simply wasn't designed to capture. So, Lucy, let's start here by painting a picture. Yet again, Birmingham, fast forward to 1939, and what it meant for a woman like your grandmother Edna to be working and navigating life as war breaks out. She's a young adult just getting started.
Yes, this is going to have a major impact on her adult life, isn't it? And in 1939, as I understand it, people were freaking out, to use a technical term,
Yeah.
because of all of this fear there was of people saying things like, the bomber will always get through. There's nothing you can do. Civilians will be on the front line in this new age of technological conflict. And Birmingham, like last time actually, will be on the front line of the home front again, if
Yeah.
that's a thing, because of its importance as a center of industrial production. And if you look at some of the newspapers from 1939, as you've shared with me, Jen, you can see people getting ready. In January of that year, Nelson's statue in the Bull Ring was protected. It was prepared for potential attacks. And then in April, we've got people saying, look, we need to do more to protect in the case of air raids. And Edna was now working in a shop. The boot industry was part of Birmingham's many industries. And I imagine this shop was selling local produce. And this, to me, is a really important part of Edna's life because she was a shopkeeper. It was what she knew. She would later go on to have a shop of her own. And even in her very old age, she, if I'm right, she sold snacks and drinks off a trolley in a hospital as a voluntary role. I imagine, like everybody else, she was affected by the fear that the age brought with it. And although I think this family are doing quite well, Edna's big sister Doris ended up running a boarding house, and Edna herself has got a white collar job working indoors. I don't want to make working as a shop assistant sound too cushy, because there are comparable jobs described from the time of one shop assistant who had a 57-hour week, who got paid 15 shillings a week. And compare that to what a male worker in industry in the late 30s got. They might have got more than £3. That's to say 70 shillings a week.
Wow.
Which is, whoa, a pretty big
Yeah.
difference, isn't it? But as the war will progress, more openings for women will open up in factories and in civil defense. So Edna has what sounds like a comfortable job working in a shop, but probably they're long hours, probably less low pay. At home, though, she's got quite a nice situation. She's still living in that house where the family had been living since 1916. She's living with her parents in her 20s. I don't know whether that's a failure to launch in some way. That sounds like quite old to me, to still be living at home with your parents. And this house in Whiston Lane near the football ground is reasonably substantial. We know at the one time it housed 8 people. There's just the 3 of them living in it now, and it has got a garden. It sounds to me like her parents are a great source of stability in her life.
Yeah, I think that's a really good way to describe the situation, actually. It's a really interesting time to be a young working woman, because, of course, she's doing all this while a war rages on. And as you kind of already alluded to, the newspapers are full of kind of air raid notices and preparations. So my mental image is her walking to the shop to sell boots with a gas mask, swinging from one hand, because that was required in 1939. And we tend to think about war as kind of these far off lands, but it's happening right there at home. So that stability of her home life with her parents probably was a real source of comfort. But in the meantime, you have this German campaign of aerial bombing attacks on British towns. And of course, that all starts September 1940, runs through May 1941. World War II is a much more dangerous place for civilians. By October of 1941, Edna's life is about to change again. It's a shift that begins a few months before, when she meets a man named Henry Kay.
It's October 1941. Birmingham feels brittle, like glass under strain. Smoke hangs low over rooftops, curling into the pale sky. On Whitton Lane, Edna steps out into the chill, her coat pulled tight, gloves worn smooth at the fingertips. The air tastes of coal dust. She makes her way to the registrar's office, where the autumn light filters through high windows. A clerk bends over a ledger, pen scratching softly. Edna stands beside Henry, the hush between them louder than the ticking clock. No flowers, no choir, just the muted rustle of paper and the weight of expectation pressing close. She smooths the edge of her sleeve, heart quickening as the vows begin. Outside, life rumbles on, trams rattling past, ration queues growing. For a moment, the war feels far away, but in this quiet room, choices are being sealed. Choices that will ripple far beyond today.
Right. So we've talked about Edna's world as war broke out and her work, but there's a personal turning point that comes with her marriage in October of 1941 to Henry Kay, who's actually known as Harry Kay. If we look at the marriage register, it appears pretty ordinary, pretty standard, right? Names, ages, occupations, the register office address. But if we delve deeper, there is much more to the story.
By now, she's working in a draper's shop. So she's still a shop assistant, but she's changed jobs. And I'm curious, Jen, I'm not quite sure why she hasn't been called up under the National Service Act. Why hasn't she been made to do war work, do you think?
The marriage register and the dates of the birth of her first son, we can estimate that Edna was around 28 weeks pregnant at the time of the marriage. So at 28 weeks, you're clearly pregnant. It's a little hard to cover some of that up, although it's possible if you're creative. My theory around that would probably be that because she's pregnant and because of the marriage that is imminent, she's just kind of able to avoid that 1941 act that requires volunteer work. I would imagine that in her situation, her parents would have been quite protective, and they would have been trying to stabilize her life rather than adding additional change and stress and pressure. So some of people might immediately be thinking scandal.
I imagined that for Edna and her family background, this would have been a big deal and not a situation where she would have felt happy or comfortable or pleased with the new situation.
So let's talk through some of those social norms, right? There's social pressure around pregnancy outside of marriage pre war. There is a period here during the Blitz where there's a bit of a suspension of those normal rules and, in some cases, an outright rejection of them. The war years have a different tone, right, in terms of social stigmas towards illegitimate children, but it's not significant enough to really change Edna's position in her home.
The man that she marries, Harry, to say about a bit about him, I think I can see why she did it. He's my maternal grandfather, who I never met. He died before I met him. But from what I've heard my mother say about him, he was very charming, very larger
Mm.
than life, loved singing, very sort of sociable man. And I guess he seemed at the time like quite a good bet as a husband because he was an aircraft fitter. So he had a job in these very busy wartime industries of Birmingham. I always understood that he was making Spitfires. I'm hoping there's more to that than it just being a sort of family myth. So he's not going to be sent overseas like so many people's husbands were. And something else that I found curious is that the marriage record shows that he was living in Edna's home with her parents in Witten Lane. Um, I don't know whether that's because perhaps he'd come to live there as a boarder, as we know that they had done at different times as a family, or if they were already living there as sort of common law man and wife. I don't know if you've got any insight into that.
Yeah, I'm really glad that you raised that actually, because the marriage register itself is one that I think deserves a little bit of time and attention. So we see that often. Actually, it's very, very common for the groom and the wife to have groom and bride to have the same address on the marriage register. In many cases, it was actually filled out after the marriage. So the marriage register with the civil registration is filed in some cases just a couple days, but they had a certain amount of time. I think they had up to 8 weeks to actually file with the general register office. So what that means, of course, is that it's the address they're living at in the moment they file their nuptials. So in a marriage record from a church, you may see two different addresses, although that's relatively uncommon. In the civil registration, you often see a shared address. Now, it could be that he moved in early. That's entirely possible, but it's probably more related to actually when they filed versus when they actually got married. So, in just 3 short years, a lot has changed for this family. Edna has gone from a boot shop assistant and other roles, part of the everyday economy of the city, to being an expectant mother. But now living in Birmingham is very different. Every aspect of daily life, it's work, transport, access to medical care, all of that becomes much more complicated and precarious.
She's having to deal with the rationing of butter, bacon, and sugar. And then from 1942, so by the time she's well and truly married, lots of stuff's rationed: the meat, the tea, the milk, the cheese, the eggs. And don't forget the air raids. There were 77 of them in Birmingham, killing more than 2,000 people, and also just messing up life, damaging the trams, damaging shops, damaging people's houses. And on top of all of this, my grandmother has got pregnant outside marriage.
Yeah, you think about what it's like to kind of enter into a marriage, right? There's this kind of dream storybook scenario where they get married and they move into the home, and the woman just kind of starts making that home her own and setting up the house. But this is a very different time to do that. It's the middle of rationing. It's the middle of the Blitz. This is not ordinary under this kind of total war situation. So she's really absorbing this emotional and logistical weight of household survival, but she's also trying to deal with a pregnancy and a brand new marriage.
Yes, and she's only 30 years old, which I guess is quite old to be getting married and having a first child in the Second World War, but to me, it sounds immensely
Yeah,
young.
yeah, she's very young. So when we're looking at these records, right, we've talked about some detail in the records that we can kind of analyze, right? Like the marriage certificate. But we're not just cataloging facts here. We're really glimpsing kind of all of these compromises and considerations that really define her entire generation.
December 1941. Birmingham's Christmas is muted under blackout rules. Streets are dim, shop windows sparse, and frost whitens soot-dark brick. Still the season clings on in paper chains over doorways, a sprig of holly pinned with a bent safety pin, and the faint sweetness of something baked with scant sugar supplies. In Edna's front room, the day revolves around ration books and careful counting. Tea is stretched, the fire kept low as coal disappears too quickly. In a desk drawer, her new marriage certificate lies hidden, its clean lines masking a truth that could upend everything. Heavily pregnant, Edna moves slowly, one hand often resting on her stomach. She's left the bustle of the shop behind. Home is now her quiet, endless shift. Outside, rationed life continues. Footsteps on frozen pavements, milk bottles clattering in the cold. But beneath it all sits a secret carrying the weight of the law. Newlyweds, expectant parents, building a fragile world on foundations that could crumble at any moment.
All right, so we've touched on something that is really fundamental to women's domestic experiences of wartime. So Edna's newly married. She's done the expected trade of working life from married life. This is a moment where going into that domestic sphere would have taken all of this resourcefulness, right? The make, do, and mend mentality.
And that did define a wartime generation. Um, Ironically, my grandmother to me didn't seem that kind of person. She seemed somebody who
Really?
liked the finer things in life. I really remember her showing me how to pencil in your eyebrows using
Oh.
makeup and that sort of thing. Uh, yeah, I guess she had it in her to be thrifty because she had to be.
Yeah, that's it's a really interesting. It's always delightful to get the personal insights of people, and oral history is actually really essential to the process of family history because we've painted a picture here of a very typical wartime newlywed couple, but from your memories, maybe she didn't quite fit that mold as well as some of us might think that our ancestors did. So that's really important that you actually draw that out because it you know it's the combination of the research plus the emotion plus the actual memories of the family and the oral history, it's all really essential. So there's all of this happening, and yet behind all of this, your family actually just recently made some revelations about the marriage itself, and I wonder if you could just talk through that with us a little bit and how that came to be.
Oh yes. Here's my revelation. My
Yes, this
goodness.
is the
This
the
was
pin drop, everybody.
this
This is it. This is it.
this is so exciting. My stepfather, who's a really avid family historian, discovered that when my grandmother married, her being pregnant wasn't the only unusual thing. He also discovered that Harry, Edna's new husband, was already married. He was a bigamist. So he had a wife living who had two children who were living elsewhere, a whole other secret first family. And my mother, investigating this, then discovered that as far as this first wife's family were concerned, Harry had just disappeared. And
Hmm.
they had assumed that he'd been killed in an air raid.
Oh,
And his first wife didn't die until 2001,
goodness.
which was quite a revelation. We've got no reason to suspect that Edna, my grandmother, ever knew anything about this. And it's a real feature of more recent life, isn't it? People discovering other families, other stories, other secrets. But it's been delightful because we've now got all these relatives that we didn't know about. So my mother had a new half sister who's now sadly passed away, but my mother got the chance to meet her. And me and my brother have got our new cousins. But neither of these two families knew about the existence of the other one until 2020. Isn't that quite
Wow.
something?
It is very surprising when that happens. I have to admit I've made similar discoveries in my own family tree to get the understanding that she never, or at least you believe that she never knew about the first marriage, and then the other wife never knew either. It's quite an astonishing moment. It's really a moment where genealogists and historians have to distinguish between fact and experience, right? There's that level of how much evidence do I need to actually believe that this is true? Well, I know in the 1939 register, he's listed by himself as a boarder, but that for sure is probably, I mean, to me, that was the moment that it really stood out in the research when I was looking at your family was like very clearly by 1939, he has isolated himself from his first family.
From his first wife. Yes, yes, yes. We've been able to speculate why. It might have been because she was
Mm,
Catholic, and that was sometimes a reason why people didn't feel able to give divorces. And also, she
yeah.
wasn't very well, so her children were being cared for by Harry's own mum. So he was obviously in a situation that he found unpleasant to be in, and walked out.
Yeah, and that probably alludes a little bit to why we haven't found any evidence of divorce or, any other formal or official departure or separation of the marriage, right? If she's Catholic, even though
Mm.
divorce was more accessible at that time, both to females, but also economically to the working classes, um, that that religious aspect would have made a big difference.
Well, one of the reasons they had to relax the divorce laws in the 1920s, as I understand it, was because there was so much bigamy going on.
Right.
World
Yeah.
War One had seen a lot of people make quick marriages, marriages that they, wanted to get out of, couldn't afford to. It was too complicated. They were just getting married again. So you can see why you might think,
Mhm.
well, let's just make it a bit easier for people get divorced so that they're not committing so much bigamy.
Yeah, it's really interesting to think about how the war really blurred boundaries, right? World War One and World War Two. So you've got military men that are moving around the globe, paperwork lags. Sometimes those choices are made in desperation. And again, Harry, in this case, wasn't in the military. So we don't know specifically what his reasons were, but, we've speculated along a couple of different lines. Let's not forget, though, of course, Edna is 30 years old. She's pregnant. Her husband was already married. This isn't just a family secret, right? It's a legal risk.
It was a secret for Harry alone.
Yeah, yeah,
But it was risky for him because this was illegal to get
yeah,
married again. And if he'd been caught doing it, he could have got 7 years in prison or a really big fine.
yeah. And We do know that persecutions for bigamy peak actually during both world wars. So to bring this back to Edna specifically, what we do know, of course, is that she is a young woman making and dealing with the choices that are available to her in 1941. So she's got a quick civilian marriage, she's got a pregnancy during the upheaval of war. There's almost a sense that she's searching for stability in a way in this city that's under attack. There's nothing in the records, of course, that tells us what she would have actually felt. There's nothing that reveals what she knew or didn't know, although we have you, Lucy, to help us with that. But they do place her very clearly in a moment where women were negotiating intense expectations about timing, respectability, survival, and a bit of secrecy.
So Edna, in this episode, has had a really dramatic time. She's got married while already being pregnant. And it was more dramatic than she knew because she'd got married to a man who was already married himself and who had a previous living wife and living children already. But that isn't the end of the story. There's more to come.
There is more to come. There's sirens and rubble around Edna as she steps into this new chapter, one that's going to be defined by grief and resilience. Join us next time for part 3 of A Family History of Wartime Women, where we uncover how Edna becomes a mother in a city broken by war, and what her silence means for those who came after her. If you missed part 1, go back and listen to Born into a World at War to follow her story from the beginning. If you've enjoyed what you've heard, leave us a review and subscribe to A Family History of wherever you get your podcasts so you never miss a moment. And if you want to understand Britain's wartime experience on a deeper level, visit findmypast.co.uk/A Family History of, where you can delve into newspaper archives and records that we featured today, like the 1939 Register.